Hi guys! I saw a couple of films in the theater and I figured I'd go ahead and talk about them. The first film I saw was The Inventor. This is a stop motion film about the life of Leonardo da Vinci and it was directed by Jim Capobianco. Capobianco was most well known for being the original writer for Ratatouille, and this is a directorial debut, so I could see why he'd want to paint on a bigger canvas. That being said, I don't think this movie is very good. So going into this film, I was expecting it to be in the style of those old Rankin fast stop-motion animated films, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and The Little Drummer Boy. Due to the budget limitation of those older films, it gave the puppets in the film a very odd look that could probably be considered creepy to some people. Thankfully, the style in The Inventor did not look like that at all, and I dare say it was incredibly refreshing to see a movie like this. Stop motion isn't much of a popular animation style in movies anymore, so this was a breath of fresh air to see, and it especially looked great in the theater. The film was also composed of some 2D animation segments, and they looked pretty great as well. I got some enjoyment when seeing some of Da Vinci's real-life notes shown throughout the film in different 2D sequences. Sadly, although I would give this film's animation a 9 out of 10, this film's story was more like a 4 out of 10. This film tried really hard to touch on themes about life and the universe and who we are as human beings, yet it's surrounded by incredibly cheap comedy that clouds the entire film. There's a pair of morticians that bury bodies in a cemetery that Da Vinci steals bodies from, and they have comedic banter together when the body they were supposed to bury goes missing. It's supposed to be treated as a funny scene, but in reality, I was very bored and annoyed the whole way through. Not only that, but this happens twice in the movie. Yay! If you thought that was annoying, they eventually introduced Charles V and Henry VIII, and they did nothing but try to insult each other the entire rest of the film. It was funny for about 5 minutes, but then it started to get really old. The type of characters they were written as don't really feel like they'd work it for a long period of time, and they didn't. Other than the humor, the soundtrack wasn't that good either. The individual soundtrack was decent, but the lyrical songs sounded really off. The songs were acceptable, but they all completely left my head as soon as I left the theater. Now, the movie's length felt justified enough, but what really killed the experience for me was the structure and pacing of the film. For the first 10 or 15 minutes, everything seems pretty smooth sailing, but the film eventually slows to a crawl and does nothing but waste time. The plot keeps shifting directions, and it ends up being an experience that doesn't know what it wanted to do. It has a clear message, but the execution of that message just felt really messy. It's a film that would be too slow for children, yet ironically too childish for adults. As it turns out, this film is based on a short film from 2011, also directed by Capobianco. I decided to check it out after watching the film, and to my surprise, it was a noticeable improvement. It was only 7 minutes long, yet its story felt a lot more focused. Sure, it's not a masterpiece of modern filmmaking, but it was more worth my time than the feature film. Overall, this was not a bad film, but I feel like the overall experience was not worth the $10 I contributed to the film's tiny box office. I give this film a 6 out of 10. The second film I saw was Outlaw Johnny Black. This film is directed by Michael Jai White, who also stars in the film. This film is most well known for being a spiritual successor to the 2009 film Black Dynamite, which was a parody of 70s blaxploitation films and a cult film. It even got to the point where it had a cartoon on Adult Swim with 2 seasons. Outlaw Johnny Black was announced years ago and was seemingly stuck in production hell for a while until its release in 2023. Similar to Black Dynamite, this is also a parody film and builds off a lot of tropes from Western films. Many people watching will probably say, hey, doesn't that sound like Blazing Saddles? And you're right. However, there is one key difference that separates these films. Blazing Saddles is actually good. One thing I should note is that I've never seen Black Dynamite, so I'm not sure if the style present in this film is also reflective of that film, but this film felt very boring to watch. I enjoy watching films that are unintentionally horrible, but when a film is insisting that it is cheesy, it only feels embarrassing to watch. Anybody remember Samurai Cop 2 and how that film was trying super hard to be a piece of shit? Wow, we're so bad. That's so funny. Isn't it funny that we hired Tommy Wiseau to play the bad guy and he sounds identical to how he did in The Room? That's comedy. In all seriousness, this film feels like a shitty mid-2000s parody film, but with less of a budget. The jokes are rarely funny, and there are points in the film where I question if they're even trying to tell a joke. Early on in the film, one of the characters comes across a tribe of Native Americans, and they initiate a wedding ceremony with a large man dressed in drag. It's pretty clear that this was a joke, but another one of the natives was one of the whitest people I've ever seen. I was confused if this was meant to make fun of early films inaccurately depicting people of different cultures, or if they were low on extras that day so they had someone from the crew dress up to be in the movie. Regardless, it was very weird. I wish I could say more about why I didn't like this film much, but there really isn't much to say. This film is a slog and runs at 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is way too goddamn long for a movie like this. The plot is incredibly simple, which is fine for a comedy parody film, but there are so many scenes where very little happened in the film, and it really dragged. Nearly 20 minutes would pass in the film, and I would think, wait, did anything even happen there? You could probably remove like 45 minutes and the movie wouldn't change much at all. When I was watching, it was clear that this film was very low budget. I figured it cost around $1 million or $2 million. At that point, there really isn't much of an excuse to have this film over 2 hours long, when some of that runtime could be reduced and keep the pacing tighter. The film isn't bad, but it was very boring. If this seems like something you'd like, then sure, check it out. I give this film a 4 out of 10. Adios!